Hello, everybody. You have joined us for another episode of Cap and Gown. I'm Rachel Phillips Buck, VP for Student Success at Ferris Resources. Super excited about our episode today. We have a really fantastic guest. I can't wait to introduce you to him. This is our 6th episode of this season. And for those of you who are counting, you are about 2/3 the way done with your fall semester. Congratulations, good work. I know so many of you are working on your advising and registration right now, so Godspeed for you in that process. I know a lot that goes into that, and if you do advising really well, it's time consuming and you really make a huge difference to your students, so thank you for that. If you are joining us and LinkedIn, make sure that you follow us on LinkedIn so you get notifications whenever we get new episodes that come out. If you're listening to us on YouTube, you can subscribe so that you will get the same. If you are listening to us wherever you get your podcast, awesome. Thank you so much. I'm happy to be able to talk to you while you're doing whatever else you're doing. So thank you for that opportunity. Also, happy Halloween. It's not as exciting when Halloween happens on a Tuesday. That's not the best, but my daughter, who just started middle school, had the opportunity to dress up today. She did not take it because she was not sure whether or not it was going to be cool to do that. So she's got to get the lay of the land, and then she'll decide what she's going to do. We did not have an episode last week because I was traveling. I was in New Orleans, which was a great experience. We were at the CSRDE, which is a conference that's really about retention and student success. And it was a great experience. Matt presented with one of our partners about retention and student success. And so that was a joy. However, they lost my bags both on the way there and the way home. So that was not awesome. I'm not going to tell you what airline it is, but I'm very unhappy with them. All right, which brings us to the State of the Union. All right, the first article that I have for you is out of Inside Higher Ed. This is another student voice flash survey talking specifically around orientation and what kinds of things students want to see in orientation. I am just going to be really honest with you. I find these articles incredibly hard to read. Usually I have to try to decipher them. I show them to Matt and then he's like, this is what they're trying to say. I'm going to read you. You're not going to understand this. I just want to tell you the kinds of things that I'm having to wade through as I'm bringing you articles. Here's a paragraph in this article. Overall, about 3 in 10 students each say that the ideal length for a new student orientation is a half day, a full day, and 2 to 3 days. Very few students say it should be longer. Does anybody know what that means? I don't know what that means. Let me tell you what I do know about what this article says. So first of all, they say students really want a choice when it comes to orientation. About 95% of the students that they polled said it's super important for them to be able to either attend online or in person to have some kind of choice in the matter. So I think that's really helpful. Many schools, especially over COVID, kind of adapted to that. But it's important to students to be able to choose. The other thing is when you ask students about what topics they want for you to cover in orientation, things like mental health, time management, physical health and wellness, diversity, equity, inclusion, elective study skills, all of those things come out. I do think it's an interesting thing to ask students who maybe haven't been to orientation or have only been to orientation once, what kinds of things they think a school should cover, because maybe they don't have any idea about all of the things that would be most helpful for us to cover in those. And then the paragraph I read to you before, basically what that means is your orientation should not be longer than 3 days. Almost all of the students said it should be between half a day and 3 days, but any longer than that is going to be too long for them. So they have some other suggestions in there. In-person format is preferred by students. And of course, there's always the question in orientation about how you balance what the institution values and needs to tell students with what they want and how you kind of negotiate that. So there are some good things in that article, but I would really like for someone to just go through those student voice articles and simplify them in a way that we can all kind of dive into without using too many of our brain calories. All right, the next article that I have for you is a pretty interesting one. It's an opinion article coming out of Inside Higher Ed. It's specifically around FERPA, and it's the idea that maybe FERPA is not as high tech as it should be, which that should not be surprising for any of us, right? This is coming around an issue where some students got doxxed because of their participation in what do you call that when you're on campus in your protest about a protest. What I think is interesting in this article, though, is they talk about how FERPA got created. So 1974 is our first iteration of FERPA. And it really was like in 1974, hey, listen, you can release directory information, which we all know, things like their full name, class year, home address, and participation in officially recognized activities. There was a slight change to FERPA in 1998, which says you can also release student photographs and email addresses. And that's really been the last functional change to FERPA. So it's really interesting when I work with schools, you just have like a very extreme oftentimes, like we can't tell anybody about or anyone anything about any student. And then on the other side, sometimes they're just sharing information really broadly. But this article talks about how FERPA was created in a time of phone books where you actually did have directory information that existed. But now that we're thinking about an age of big data, online publication of directory student information, actually makes students more vulnerable because you can kind of cross-reference an email address with a social media account and find out a lot of information. And when we added in student photographs to directory information, now all of a sudden you're really opened up to biometric records, right? We can do facial recognition if we can get pictures of our students. And so I think there's a really interesting conversation to have about how FERPA needs to change in this environment of more access to data and being able to cross-reference it. In 2008, FERPA did make an allowance that schools could pass on some of that identifiable information to vendors. So if you think about things like Canvas or SIS being able to pass that information on, they did make that change. But if you think about the loophole where now we can get all the directory information and cross-reference that to find social media pages, anybody who is kind of an official of the school, including vendors, can get that information. And also remember that students actually cannot sue around FERPA violations. So the only one who can sue is the U.S. Department of Education. The way they would sue is they would actually threaten the federal funding of an institution, which is such a gigantic thing. It's actually never been done. And so if you think about, like, we can't even really enforce it well, I think there's going to be some really rich conversations around what happens with FERPA, how do we need to change it, and how do we need to think about it differently. So I think that's kind of on the horizon, is something that we're going to be talking about in the semesters and years to come. All right, the next article that I have for you is 6 strategies to encourage college campus event attendance. I would encourage you to read this one. A couple of the things that they suggest that I really like are, first of all, interrupt the process. So specifically around disengaged students, if you are trying to get them to participate in some sort of campus event, you want to put it in a place where it disrupts what they normally do. So at the college I went to, we had chapel, and then everybody left chapel and went over to lunch. So the idea would be that you would have a disruption to that normal flow. You would be standing kind of in the middle of that sea of students and be holding an event there so that it disrupts what they're used to doing and kind of puts them in a new place, which I think is a great idea. Make sure you create value for your events. I also really love this article suggests giving students responsibility for events and allowing ownership. And so if you think about some of your disconnected students who love something, saying to them, hey, why don't we have an event around that thing? Will you help me plan it? Will you invite your people? We'll give you some ownership over that, is a great way to get some of those quiet students to be really connected. I will tell you, though, this article does my pet peeve, which is say, like, make sure you create belonging, but has absolutely no suggestions for how you do that, which, why do we do that all the time? Like, we should create belonging. How do we do it? You guys know how we do it. Culture Code gives us all of those codes of belonging that we can send. So it's a good article if you're thinking about your events. All right, I have 2 more for you. One is, I don't know if you guys saw that the U.S. the US is now banning transcript holds, which is really, really interesting. This is a really common practice for so many schools that if you haven't paid your balance, they're going to withhold your transcript so you can't go on to another school. This law is saying you have to give a transcript for all of the classes that a student has taken and paid for. So if I've paid you for 3 years and then I have 1 semester of outstanding balance, you still have to be able to give me my transcript for those 3 years. You can hold it for the classes that I haven't paid for, which I think is really interesting. So those rules are going to take effect July 1st, 2024. They're not finalized yet, but it looks like that's how they're moving. And this is going to be retroactive as well. So that means that students who previously have had their transcripts held, that is not going to be legal anymore. You have to release those to them so that they can go on and do other things. So it's going to be interesting to see how our registrars deal with that, and also to see how that affects students' participation in other things that they may need their transcript for. All right, the last one that I have for you is called Psychology Professor Uses Zombies in Neuroscience Unit, which I love. So this professor, who's named Eugene DeRobertis, is a professor at Brookdale Community College. He decided a couple of years ago, he was teaching psychology students, and he was really concerned because he noticed that they didn't have sort of a ground level understanding of how the brain works. So if you think about like just basic neuroscience concepts, they really were struggling. And so he decided that he was going to create a video game that's called Zombie Resurrection, where students have to apply their knowledge of the brain, of neurons and nervous system parts and processes and functions to reanimate the dead and save all of humanity. So this is an online game that he created with the Teaching and Learning Center on his campus. It's been in play for 10 years. So students really love it and they think it's really fun. And what I think is really admirable about this is that students who played the science-based game ended up scoring an average of 10 points higher on the corresponding unit assessments than those peers who didn't. So obviously it's really effective for helping students learn those kind of basic brain understandings. Also, I try to find it online. I would love to play that game. I think it would be really awesome. So we love to acknowledge when people are really innovative in the ways that they create pathways for students to be successful. So that is the State of the Union for this week, our last day in October. And I am thrilled that that means I get to introduce to you our guest. So joining me is Matthew Little. He's the Student Success Coordinator at the University of Tennessee Southern. Hello, Matthew.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
I am so good. I'm thrilled that you have joined us today. I want to introduce you in the most appropriate way possible, given all of your experiences. So I want to tell you, first of all, that I went to your LinkedIn page and I was going to print all of the experiences that you had. And then my printer said that's going to be 20 pages long. I'm not kidding. And I was like, maybe I'll just refer to some of those experiences. You have done so many amazing things.
I've had a lot of opportunities and luckily I've had the good fortune to work with a lot of different great schools and organizations. So it's been wonderful.
Well, your experiences are so varied. There's a couple of them that I want to call out, and then we will talk a lot about what you're currently doing. But I don't know if you know this, but I saw that you were a DJ in Chattanooga.
Yeah.
You know, I was a DJ too.
Oh, I didn't know.
In Indiana. So how did you get that job?
I will admit it's completely in the genes. When I was a child, that's what my dad always wanted to be, was a DJ. And so as a kid, he would work at different radio stations around Chattanooga. And so they would plop me down with my Kermit the Frog stuffed animal in the production room so I could watch him do his thing. And I absolutely loved it. I thought it was great. I didn't want to do it for a living because it doesn't pay a ton.
Yeah.
So when I was about 3 or 4, my dad let me do a station identification on air. And it was fantastic because I completely forgot what radio station he worked for and said the radio station we actually listened to's name. So the end of my station identification was my dad going no, and then
Just kidding.
and then putting into a record. So, but the opportunity when I started going to college, my community college had a radio station, and so anytime I wasn't in class, I was in the studio, and I ended up because of that, I was the only paid member of the staff because I started doing the morning show,
Yeah.
and then a local station said, "Hey, we'd like to hire you to do overnights on the weekend." So I started doing that, and it was great, and I loved it. And then when I was an exchange student in Alaska, I did national student exchange. They also had a radio station, and no one wanted to be up at 6 o'clock. But I'm from the Eastern time zone, so that felt pretty late to me. So I was like, sure, I'll do 6 o'clock in the morning. So it just
That's awesome.
yeah, one myself and Alaska Broadcaster Association's award for produced some commercials for an event they had on campus. So it was very exciting.
Oh, awesome. See, Matthew, this is the thing about talking to you. I'm like, you have all these experiences, and then you just drop an extra 7 that I've never heard of before. Like, I was in Alaska and won an award for broadcasting. That's pretty remarkable. Well, I worked also at my college NPR station.
Mhm.
When I graduated from my undergraduate with a psychology degree, you can't get a lot of jobs with an undergraduate degree in psychology. So my mom also worked at a radio station, and she got me a job as a daytime DJ at a country and western station, which I do not listen to country music.
Yeah.
So it was really depressing all day long to listen to like all the sad country songs. And somewhere in the middle of that, I was like, I need to go back and get my master's degree and stop doing this job at this little tiny station in Indiana. So it's a pretty fun job. If you can talk to yourself, it's a pretty fun job.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. I mean, yeah, basically just have to entertain yourself, and no one knows what you're doing in the booth. You're just having a good time. So
I used to actually be really surprised because I would just be talking to myself, and then I would come out and like the office people would be like, "Oh, so that was a strange dream that you had last night." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, people are listening." I felt like I was just talking to myself, but nope, there were some people around. So you also worked both for the National Park Service and for AmeriCorps.
yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit about your college journey, but were you doing those two things while you were in college or intermittently with your college career?
Intermittently with my college. One of the things so I was actually in the first class of AmeriCorps in 1994.
Wow.
And I didn't even know I was joining AmeriCorps actually when I joined. So I had gone to see my aunt in Boston, and I said, I really want to go to college, but I have no idea how I'm going to pay for that. And she said, well, there's an organization here in town that will pay you money for college if you join them. And she turned and said, oh, well, there's one of them right now. And we were in a pharmacy store. And so I turned and talked to that person, and they said, hey, yeah, go by our offices and they'll tell you all about it. So I went down, and they said, well, we're going to be in AmeriCorps next year. And I said, I don't know what that is, but okay, sounds interesting. And they said, well, you get to work in schools. And I knew I wanted to be an education major. And I said, and at the end of your time, you'll get $4,725 for college. And for me, I was like, that is incredible. Where do I sign up?
Yeah.
That's amazing. And so about, I guess 3 weeks after my 18th birthday, they hired me. Or actually, no, they hired me right before my 18th birthday. And then 3 weeks later, I moved to Boston from Chattanooga and started working at AmeriCorps with an organization called City Year. And I mean, really, I'd say that one step is probably the thing that made everything that happened after it possible, because I don't know how I would have gone to school if not for that. And it was an incredible experience, and it gave me a lot of confidence that I could do these things that I want to do. I got to work in classrooms, and they let me lead camps for vacation camps in the spring and for spring break and winter break. And I was a very shy 18-year-old that it told me, it was like, oh, I'm capable of doing certain things. And it made it possible for me to go to college, because otherwise I don't know how that was going to happen. And then, yeah, so that was wonderful. And I had the good fortune of working for AmeriCorps a couple of different times as a staff member or going back in as a participant. And the National Park Service came kind of from that to I worked through another organization at 2 different national parks, which was an incredible experience. That was, I mean, just every one of them was great. I highly recommend all of those. I worked for an organization called the Student Conservation Association, and I worked in Fort Scott, Kansas, beautiful Fort Scott, working for the fort there, and I got to develop a children's program, a middle school program actually, which I recently discovered. They just said, "Hey, why don't you come up with something?" So I did, and it seemed like it went all right. I did not realize they just celebrated their 23rd anniversary or
Of the
22nd
same thing?
anniversary of the same thing they're still doing. It's called the Trailblazers program. It still exists.
How
It's actually not
fun.
that different from what I developed back in 2000. So I like to think there's that little part of me still in Fort Scott, Kansas.
Listen, that's so remarkable because as a program builder, so often if it is your program that you built and you leave, it can kind of just like disappear into the ether. And so it for sure speaks to the testament of how good it must be that they're like, oh no, we got to keep this up. We got to keep going. That's amazing.
Yeah, a lot of colleges are the home of the first annuals, but a lot of them are not home of the second annuals, and so it's nice to see that it's sustained at least.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I do want to put all of that early experience in the context of what you have done since, and thinking about just the breadth of experience. In fact, when I was going to post our session on LinkedIn, I was going to say something about come join me. And my guest who's worn pretty much every hat there is to wear at a college or a university. So you have experience, and you were the director of high school programs at an institution. You worked in admissions recruitment, eventually VP for enrollment management, student services technology, research analyst around retention. You did first year experience. You were a success center director, and then also now the student success coordinator. It is just incredible the breadth of experience you have. I would assume that helps you quite a bit in your current position because you just understand so many things about how the institution works.
I'd like to think so. I hope so. I don't know if my colleagues would agree, but I would hope so. One of the I will say probably one of the biggest eye openers for me early in my career is when I went from admissions, whether it was with dual enrollment, which was high school programs. We had a high school on campus. Plus, I did the advising for the students. I hired the faculty. I did the advising and the registration. So it was a really great first step in higher ed, in the fact that I had to touch a whole bunch of different things.
It's like a mini institution, right?
Yeah. And so it was great. And so I had to connect with all these other parts of the institution, things that I may not have understood, but for my job, I was like, oh, I need to partner with these people and get to know them better. And that was a great experience. And then I went to admission, just regular admissions at that point, and the technology and the data, because everything was getting so, CRMs were a hot ticket at that point.
Yeah.
But after the birth of my first child, I kind of wanted to stop being on the road. And that's how I ended up in institutional research. And to be honest, that probably was the biggest eye opener for me, because I'd often thought of IR of, just kind of almost not necessarily the dark side of the campus, but, it's like, I'm asking for this data and they're just not giving it to me. Like, why won't they give me the things I need? And,
right.
Why aren't they're not answering my question. They're just asking me more questions. And then when I got to go in there, it really helped me understand why those questions were being asked. And kind of, I think a very key thing that I've tried to remember throughout my career was people ask for data, but what they're looking for is information.
Right.
And that is and so it's important that you ask that second question of, you're asking for this, but why are you asking
what
for this?
What do you need to know? Yeah.
And if, because actually what you're asking for is not what you need. That's not what you're looking for. You're actually looking for this over here.
Yeah, for sure.
And it really opened my eyes in terms of how I deal with, my colleagues and speak to them of, okay, they're looking for information and that's why they're asking for this data, or I'm looking for information. And it really, and I'm much nicer to IR than I ever was before. I would never say a bad thing about IR.
Yeah.
Since that time.
I really think it's interesting. IR is so fascinating because, when we work with our schools and getting data into our system, so often the lack of literacy around data, where it comes from, who collects it, if it's real, if it, it does that exist somewhere. So not just where it comes from and is it accurate, but also a real lack of understanding that you can't just ask for something that doesn't exist. You know what I mean? Like, you can't just go to IR and be like, and can you also tell me blah, blah, blah? Well, where does that live? Well, we don't collect it. Okay, well, then the answer is no, I can't get that for you, right? But I think it's such a good point that people are asking for information and they're trying to figure out how to get that information. But I can't tell you how many times I've sat in a room with an IR person who's really good and is like, exactly what you said. That's not what you want. I can get you what you need, but this is the way we're going to go about it. And you're going to be much happier with the results. So yeah, it's such a powerful, that understanding of data, I think, is going to just get more and more and more and more important. As in all of our jobs, we're trying to make really transparent the work that we're doing and the impact that it has, and understand our students better and all of that. So I love that. I think it's such an important perspective on IR. Okay, sorry, I have two more questions. Well, I have one more question about your background. So you also have been the reviewer of the Journal of College Student Retention, which that's amazing. We could talk about that for a long time, but I would like to get to the most important question I'm going to ask you about your background, which is, when you lived in Japan, which we'll talk about in a minute, you were a guest lecturer and you delivered a lecture called The American Southern Culture for Japanese high school students.
Yes.
What did you, first of all, did you talk about pimento cheese in your Southern culture lecture? Do you have a strong opinion about pimento cheese?
So I avoid, because I didn't want to court controversy, and so I wanted to be careful. I didn't want there to be.
No, you don't want to cause a ruckus around.
Exactly, yeah, and an international incident. But yeah, so no, it was a lot of fun. So it was a high school there in Japan, in the prefecture I was living in, and I tried to connect everything to something that they were familiar with. And so the idea, sweet tea, obviously was included within there.
Yeah.
And because they're like, okay, we know tea. And they're like, but we put a ton of sugar in it. And we do it while it's hot. And then we put ice in it afterwards. And because I knew this would freak them out, I made sure I put pictures of fried catfish. Because catfish is not a fish you eat in Japan. It is a bottom feeder that they would not even, and so it was designed to gross them out a little bit. They're like, because I figured out what catfish was in Japanese to tell them, and they were like, eh? And they're like shaking their heads in horror. I was like, no, really.
Who in their right mind would eat fried catfish?
Exactly. I'm like, but there you go. This is something that we
How
eat.
Interesting.
And showing them pictures of stadiums, of like college football stadiums and NFL stadiums in the South. It was such an eye opener for them. They were all just stunned, because their notion of what the U.S. is completely based upon media,
right?
And so like letting them know, like, this is where we're talking about, and this is food that is specific to a particular region, and not every American eats it. And,
I love that. I think it's just so fun. I don't know if you know, but I did a PowerPoint on Frito pie last year.
Oh,
because this is a thing that I take very seriously. And so for sure. Yeah. So I always think it's really fun when you're like, here's a thing that, I have opinions about it and I can tell you about it. And it's even more fun when someone is like, I've never even heard of this thing you're talking about. Like, why are you doing that thing? So I love that. It's great. Okay. So let's move on. Now that I have established your many varied experiences that you've had over the course of your life so far, I would like for us to go back. You alluded a little bit to this about your college journey. So thinking about your experience starting college and then moving through and completing that, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. My parents were wildly supportive of me and of me going to college, which was great. Neither one of them have a 4-year degree. They were 18 when I was born. I grew up in a trailer park on the side of Lookout Mountain in Chattanooga. Our first house was a house that had been a rental property that basically they just kind of abandoned. And so, but it was huge. Like I was thrilled we were living in a house, not a trailer. It was really big. But as time went on, of course, they're like, it was never a question of if I was going to college. It was like, you're going to go to college when you go to college. Unfortunately, no one knew exactly how that particularly worked.
Can I ask you a question about that? Where did they get that perspective that that is a thing that you should do? Do you know?
I don't know. So my grandparents on my dad's side had sixth grade educations, but my grandmother's mother loved teachers. Like she thought teachers were great, and so all of her kids thought teachers were great. And they knew that to be a teacher, you had to have a degree.
Okay.
My other grandparents had high school diplomas, and they were fairly accomplished. My grandmother's one of the first women to serve on the Insurance Adjusters Board in the state of Tennessee, and my grandfather worked at IBM during World War II, and he was what you would call a computer programmer now, probably, but that was kind of not a thing. So they had a notion of like, oh, there's education it's important, and there's these options. And I always wanted to be a teacher, which most kids do at some point because that's a job they know.
Mm-hmm.
But even as I got older, I would do volunteer work in schools, and I was like, I want to be a teacher. And they're like, well, I know you have to go to college for that, for sure. But I think also for them, the notion of their options were limited, and they knew that by their lack of formal education for my parents. And so this was something that would allow them. My mom really wanted to go to the University of Georgia, was accepted. She was a national merit semifinalist. However, when I came along, that kind of changed a lot of plans. So I think that was part of it too, of like a dream deferred kind of thing of maybe I didn't get to do it. Maybe you can do it.
But they didn't have any idea how to make that a reality.
No, they had no idea. And they tried their best. I had no idea. I thought scholarships. I thought someone was just going to show up at my high school with a bag of money and be like, "Here you go. You're so smart. Here's a scholarship for you." I thought the FAFSA was just loans, and so I never filled out a FAFSA, and it was really complicated. It was this multi-page thing, and I had tax forms, and I didn't know what that. So I was like, "Well, I don't want that. That's all loans, and I don't want to get a loan." I didn't really know what they were looking for. And I was a fairly good student, just extremely lazy and unmotivated. I didn't study, didn't take notes, didn't do those type of things. And so I remember I had a class that was like preparing for college, and they said you have to apply to a school. And so I picked a school that had no application fee because I was like, I can afford that one. And it turns out it was a culinary school, which I had no interest in going to, but I was just like, it was free, and so that's why I picked it.
Oh my God.
Like, do you want to be a chef? I was like, no, I don't want to be a chef. I don't know.
Get me out of this.
Why are you asking me about being a chef?
So I want to camp out there for just a minute, because I always say that when you belong in a place, when you feel like it's legitimate for me to be here, you can't imagine all of the ways that those of us who are not sure we belong there are getting the message that you 100% don't belong here. You don't know what you're doing. You cannot be successful here. And I think things like not filling out the FAFSA because you're afraid it's a loan, which, holy cow, that would have made your life so much easier if you had been able to, if somebody had said, no. This is a thing you have to do. No. Application fees. I mean, this is a thing that a certain population of the United States would never think as a barrier to applying to college, much less the fact that somebody had to say, hey, you have to apply to a college. They're not going to show up in your high school and be like, okay, we're taking you. You're going to go to this school. So I just think that at the very least, thinking about how we are so fluent now in this language of higher education, and yet you can't imagine all of the little things that a 17 or 18-year-old that you say to them that they're like, what does that even mean? I have no idea. Yep, I know what you're saying. I have no idea what you're saying, right? So
right. Like I know all these words, I just don't know them in that order.
Yeah, exactly. I can define them all. I just don't know what you're telling me to do. Okay, so you didn't go to culinary school.
No, no. So luckily, City Year came along, so I went, moved to Boston, did that for your work in schools. Was terribly homesick by the time at the end because I was young and I was thrilled. So I was like, I'm going to go back to my home university in my hometown. And so I got there, and during orientation, and I remember this so clearly. I still tell the story to my students to this day. They said, if you're going to have a good time here, then you need to join a fraternity or sorority. And I thought, okay, well, I'm not ever going to do that. Like I know that costs money, and I have no interest in that. And so literally at orientation, I heard this isn't for you. Like we're not for you. Like you're not going to have fun here, apparently. And so during that first year, basically any sort of roadblock that came up was just another, kind of tick mark on that. That's exactly what you said. And by my sophomore year, so I came in my second year, and in October, I don't even remember what it was that time. It was just the last straw. I was like, oh, you know what? They told me from day one I didn't belong here, so I don't.
Oh gosh.
So I dropped out in that October, my second fall, and was like, well, that's it for me.
It is such a good reminder to those of us who work with students that your intention is to say, this is how you can be successful here. And what students can hear is, if you are not going to do this, you don't belong here. And I'm not going to do that. Right. Yeah. I would have been the same way. If somebody had said to me, the only way you can be successful in college is to join a sorority, I would have been like, well, then I'm going to go home because I will never do that. I'm never going to do that. It's just so sad because, the intention of that person was really good, trying to create a pathway for you to be successful. And you're like, no, I can definitely never do that.
Like, here's a place to belong is what she was trying to say. Right. And what she was saying to me was, you don't belong. And I was like, oh, okay, well,
gosh.
Now, luckily, my parents did not, they were kind of an opinion of like, so like they didn't go to orientation. I went to orientation because they had to work. So, they were like, how did it go? And so when I dropped out, their first thing was, well, when are you going back? Like, you have to go back. They have to go somewhere. And so I went to the community college in my hometown, and I started in the next summer because I've been working all this time. And when I got there, and I will, full disclosure, I could have started there, but in my head, I was like, well, I don't want to go to a community college. Like I need to go to a university. That's what all these people I met in AmeriCorps, and this is what I have heard, like you have to go to a university.
Yeah.
And so when I went I almost felt like I'd failed into having to go to a community college. But when I got there, they were so welcoming and basically said, the world's your oyster. What do you want to do? If you want to put the effort in, we'll accept you full force. And it was a great experience. Like, it was absolutely wonderful. Everything, the faculty were great. I learned so much in that setting, and it was really, and that's the thing I tell students now. We all tell it's about fit, and for me at that time, that was my perfect fit. Was being at that community at Chattanooga State Community College. Fantastic, still love it. My brother's there now. So we're trying to keep the trend going.
Yeah.
But it was incredible. And but unfortunately, I still didn't know how the FAFSA worked. And so I would go to school for a year, work for a year, go to school for a year, work for a year. And so I graduated from Chattanooga State, went back to UTC for a little bit. Still wasn't feeling it completely. Would go work and then go back to Chattanooga State, even though I already had my associate's degree. But I was like, oh, I feel at home there. I need to regroup and see my next step. And finally, they made a change into licensure in the state of Tennessee. And there's only one university left in the state that was doing licensure the old way, where I could do K-8 licensure, which is what I wanted. And so I ended up transferring to the University of Memphis. And went there. And when I went there, I had to live in a dorm. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I have to get a loan now because I don't know how I'm going to afford this. And so I filled out the FAFSA for the first time as a 24-year-old non-traditional transfer student. And it turns out I was a full Pell the entire time and had no idea. And so they said, oh, well, yeah, college is free for you.
Oh, my goodness.
Here you go. plus your housing is basically paid for. You have to pay for board, but that's about it.
Wow.
And
What a
I wish,
relief.
yeah, I was so relieved, and it was so great to do that. However, I will say, so my orientation experience, that they made me go to orientation as a non-traditional transfer student on my birthday. I had to drive there, and it was very much a freshman orientation that I was just in there for it.
Yeah.
And as they're doing like the rah, kind of, my name is Matthew, I was like, let's get,
Oh my God.
I want to register. Let me register for classes, please. And so there's one of those things where, and that I will be honest, all of these experiences inform what I do as a professional now.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I got in there, I was able to be an exchange. I did national student exchange to the University of Alaska Fairbanks, which was great. I did my student teaching and I loved it. So and I'll be honest, while there was a lot of struggle in that period, I am forever grateful that I graduated from, and it was, I mean, it was, when I graduated, it was an event. Like,
Oh my
my
God.
aunts and uncles and my cousins and, my grandparents and my parents, my brother, like everyone converged in Memphis to see me graduate, which was incredible. And and it realized kind of the weight I was carrying for my family in doing that. And since then, I'm not the last one to graduate from a university, which is great. I'm not the last one with a bachelor's degree, which I take a lot of pride in the fact that my cousins have pursued education, and sometimes the same kind of winding path that I have. But
I mean, you earned that degree, Matthew. You earned it, right? There was no like, and then I went to college. There was like, I earned a degree. And I get a little bit moved about that because I was just teaching a class yesterday, college students, and I was talking about how the work that we do at Ferris, yes, we're a technology company, but we really believe in the way that we change family trees when a student earns their degree, and how for all of the people around them, their cousins, their siblings, whoever it is, it changes what they think is possible. It changes the trajectory of their path. And also, I was thinking, for so many of us, we know the person 2 generations ago. My grandmother, Allie Mae Jones from Alabama, is the first person in my family who went to college. And I know she's the one who did that for my family, right? And for so many of us, we have the name of the person, last generation, 3 generations ago, it doesn't matter, who earned their degree and sort of negotiated all through all of that stuff and made sense of it, and then set the rest of the generations up to be like, oh yeah, we have somebody who has expertise in that. So it's really beautiful, I think. Yeah, for generations, they're going to be like, my great grandpa Matthew Little is
great grandpappy Matthew.
Yeah, it's just amazing. All right. So I think you've said a little bit about this, but I imagine you are like I am, in that those early experiences just shape everything about the way you talk to your students and the way that you engage with them. Is that true for you?
Definitely. What I've always kind of thought is I try to be the person I wish I had.
Yep.
When I was going through this. It's someone that, I could have asked the questions of, someone who, even though I didn't want to raise my hand and ask the question, so the person would have been like, I'm going to ask you the question so that you get the answer, and draw you out to let you know you do belong, and hear those questions, hear those answers that you need, whether or not you ever want to vocalize it. I know you need them.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's what I try to do now.
I have a very strong feeling of like, I just needed somebody to be on my team. Yeah. Like, I just needed somebody to be like, hey, I'm on your team. What's the thing we're trying to solve today? Yeah. The thing I'm trying to solve today is whatever. Okay, I have some expertise in that. I'm going to help you do that, which I think is just really great language for our students to understand that we can apply our hard-earned learning to their experiences now and say, I have some expertise that I have to offer you, and I'm on your team, and I'm like all in. I don't know if, I'm sure that you do. I always find that there's the name of 1 or 2 people who decided, you are going to graduate from this institution right? And
Yeah.
this is the person who was like, just whatever it takes, whatever we need to do in order to get you through. Do you have a person like that?
So there's and oddly, she's not even at the institution I graduated from, but she was the person, and she's now the dean of the College of Education at UTC. Her name was Valerie Rutledge, and when I was in my first PDS for professional development school, so basically it was a student teaching light, she talked to me the entire time as though I was definitely going to graduate, and that I belonged, and that I was capable, and that if I had a question, it wasn't a dumb one, or it wasn't a gotcha to get you to, because as an imposter with imposter syndrome, you're like, oh, they're just waiting to catch me, and they're going to kick me out at that point because I don't belong.
Yeah.
But she didn't do that, and every interaction with her was so affirming that I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can do this. Like, this is, and I did my student teaching back home because I know that was the way I could afford it, to make sure was, to do it at home and live with my parents. And she was still, so I partnered with UTC as a Memphis student, and she was there as the dean, and she remembered, and me, and I thought, I can't believe she remembered me as this just one person, this one time in this semester. But she still talked to me that way. So it was so genuine, and the look on her face when she would say things, and we're like, oh, she means this. This isn't her job. She really believes in me. And
which is funny now as a student success professional. It is always funny when students are like, do you remember me? And you're like, of course I remember you. Like, of course. We walked through some really important things together. Of course I do. I love that so much. Okay. So I'm trying to figure out, I do want to talk about your experience in Japan, but I also want to talk about the work that you're doing now. So I think what we're going to do is let's talk about what you're doing now and how you've kind of brought your perspective to your institution. And then we're going to end on your time in Japan. Okay. All right. So you are now at the University of Tennessee Southern. Can you help our listeners just give us some context about the change of that school, where it's located, what kind of students you serve, and that sort of thing? Then we'll talk a little bit about how you are currently working with students.
Sure. So the University of Tennessee Southern has only existed since July 1 of 2021. However, in the 150 years before that, it was a Martin Methodist College. So it was a very small private institution for all those 150 years. In the summer of 21, the University of Tennessee system acquired the institution. We're located in Pulaski, Tennessee. It's a small rural community. And we are still a small rural serving institution, even with the University of Tennessee name. So we have less than 1,000 students. It's almost 1,000 at this point, but that's kind of been our size. We serve primarily southern middle Tennessee, which does not have a high post-secondary education attainment rate. There's a lot of places that are under-resourced schools, under-resourced communities. We also serve some of the North Alabama counties right below us on the other side of the border. But we are a small institution in a small town. Now we are about an hour south of Nashville and about 45 minutes north of Huntsville. So we're not completely isolated from the region, but the area around us is very much what you would imagine as a rural institution. A lot of our students, their classes and what they can do are based upon agricultural schedules. A lot of them, still work, in farms. Or they'll ask questions like, I need to go bush hogging. How long is this test going to take? Because I need to, mom and dad need me back on the farm, or that sort of thing. So
when you guys made the change to the University of Tennessee system, that's when your school really was like, hey, we have to have a position that's going to focus on student success and retention, right?
Yes. They knew they were struggling. Enrollment is so key especially for a small faith-based institution. Those are struggling across.
Yeah.
But also to do that, your enrollment plans a lot of times are going to be based upon we got to get people. We have to have people. We can't be overly choosy. We need to do what we can do. And prior to this, I mean, the retention rate was, around 50%. It was hovering in the 50s. The graduation rates were really low. And so there was they applied for a Title III grant for strengthening institutions, and they finally received it the year before, so the year of the merger. So the merger kind of started talking about in the fall of 20, and then it was completed in 21. And that's actually how I came to be. So I am actually from, the position was created for the first time ever of person over student success through the Title III grant. And so I actually arrived on campus after the switch over to UT Southern. And so I was told, all right, let's get some attention, let's get some graduation, let's get some persistence. What do we need to do? And so they had done a lot of work on the front end of like, well, here's things that we know we're struggling in. What do we do with it now? And I will say one of the best things they did in that first year, as they were kind of was contacting Pharos actually, and partnering with them to be able to get Pharos 360 as their case management system. It was that was probably the smartest move they made in that first year. I mean, before I got there. I mean,
yeah.
It was because it immediately took some steps. It started getting them some steps in the right direction.
Well, you have done remarkable work there. I was just looking at your Spark report. I mean, I think you guys, so you had lower retention rates before we started partnering with you, before you came. But I think over the last couple of years, you've had the highest retention rates that you've ever had on your, like overall, right? Not just your freshmen, but in every one of those classifications. And you also have done such a remarkable job on your transfer retention. I think it's up something like 10% since you guys started. So besides us, obviously, what would you say is the approach that you are taking to serve your students in a way that's making such a remarkable impact?
I'd say the first step was identifying where we were struggling. We were clearly, there were pockets of population throughout the campus that we were not serving to the best of our ability. And honestly, figuring out if you don't know their problem is, you can't fix it.
Yeah.
And so being able to identify those different groups of students, in some cases there was some intersectionality between those groups too, kind of looking and seeing where we were struggling. Every school I've ever worked at has said retention's everybody's business. But when it's everybody's business, it's nobody's business too.
Amen. True.
When I got here, so while I'm the point person, the chancellor and the provost both were very clear. Like this is literally, Matthew will be the conduit, but we're all going to do this, and we're going to engage you, and we're going to have those discussions, and we're going to put our money where our mouth is in terms of, well, not actual money, but we're going to put it where this is important, and we are going to evaluate things based on these actions. We're going to, encourage, we're going to support you based upon these actions and these outcomes that we want to look for. And so really having that where literally the entire institution's focus turned towards being, getting helping make students successful.
Yeah.
From onboarding, from recruiting to onboarding to when they're in the classroom, to when they're in the campus, when they're in the dorms. That made a huge impact, because at that point, whatever I'm doing becomes auxiliary to the other things that are happening throughout the students' lifetime on campus, in the classroom, and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, it's such an interesting perspective, isn't it? So I think one of the advantages of being a smaller school is that you can turn that vision to, we are not just doing what we do in little pockets, but actually we have this broad student life cycle perspective, which is, if we admit them, we're saying they can be successful, and we got to figure out how to give them a path forward, which I really love. But it is really interesting at so many institutions that is not their perspective. It's actually more common for an institution to lack a retention and student success perspective across the board than it is to have an institution that's like, no, we're all doing this and we're all going to get behind this vision. It's just very strange that has not sort of evolved, because our business is helping students to be successful. And yet in some ways institutions don't articulate that. And I'm wondering for you the difference between a big institution and a small institution, not just in the everybody get behind this vision, but also in the ways that you're able to engage with students in your connections and the kinds of things that you're solving for them.
Certainly. And that's one thing, because we're smaller and even small in geographical size, you can't hide. I mean, it's impossible to hide. And because everyone is on board too, if there's a student that I need to contact and I cannot find them, I can talk to their faculty member. Like if I see them, I'll grab them. I can talk to their coach and they will say, I will send them down there right now. Or I can talk to their RA, and no matter where they are, there's a way to find them.
Yeah.
And we reach out to them. And the other thing is, when we're reaching out to them, it's not impersonal. It's I know who you are and you're not in trouble. We're trying to find a way to support you through this. And so being able to reach out to them and find, wherever they are, but be very clear. And also I tell them my story constantly of like, look, I was a giant screw up. And if you make half them, you're not even making half the mistakes I make.
Right.
And they don't call me Dr. Little because my first name's Doctor, right? They so there's a way through this.
Yeah.
And that they know, like, we're coming from a place of care and support. And I think you mentioned it, promise. We accepted you on the basis that you're going to be able to graduate.
Yep.
And we will do everything we can in partnership and in concert with you to help you achieve that possibility, because it takes both of us, but we're going to do that.
Yeah, I love that. It's funny, when I was doing academic probation with my students and they would be like, like GPAs of like 0.5, and they'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. And I'd be like, do you know what my GPA was when I was in school? And they're like, no. And I'm like, that's right, you don't. You have no idea. I was a terrible student. So you don't have to be embarrassed. It's nice to be able to offer that vulnerability. And also the expertise that says, if you stick with me, we're going to get you through this. We're going to figure out how to make it better. So I really love that. I was thinking about the things that we have to solve for our students. So thinking about like how you find your students, and we talked about this connection. And it's really funny, you and I were talking before we started just about all of the things that you have to help students figure out. And so many of those things have nothing to do with your job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's like, how do I get insurance or go to the doctor or those sorts of things. And I would imagine, given your population that you're serving and a smaller city, that you have a lot of those things pop up.
We do. And one of the things that we end up seeing is not only are we supporting the student, we also have to support the family, because so many of them are first generation families. And so we have to help them navigate these things as well and help them understand how it works. But I mean, there's things, and honestly, it's even things like breakups and, my dad wants me to go to work right now, or it's also things like, I can't afford gas. I don't know where I'm going to get gas. How do I need to work because I can't afford these books. And it's amazing how many times you have those conversations, and luckily as you have them, you're like, all right, we've got to build resources around these needs. But also,
I don't want to have those conversations and then be like, good luck, I'm sorry, right? I want to have those conversations and be like, and do we have a grant that's going to help you with that thing that you're asking for, right? Don't just do empathy. We need to have some actual action in that.
And one of the things that has come up a lot, especially in the last couple of years, I've noticed, is training students how to advocate and navigate their work experience, because some of them, some places are really short on work, and so anyone who's working is working a lot.
Yeah.
Helping them to be able to navigate, to say, if you told your employer you need to be in class on these days, and they agreed to that, you need to talk. Let's talk about how do we communicate with your employer to make sure you aren't having to subjugate your academic needs because of that. And that's something that I don't think I would have even thought about would be something that a college would do when I was in college. But like for our students, they desperately need it, because they're like, look, they're going to tell me they told me I'm going to lose my job if I don't do this or this. And so, trying to figure out like, okay, let's help you find better employment then. Let's help you figure out how you have these conversations with people.
Yeah. It's why I love student development so much, because it really is just such a beautiful time in life when you are becoming a fully grown adult, but also have no idea what you're doing, you know? And so all of the ways that we can say, no, this is how you show up at work, and these are your rights, and this is how you get a lease, and this is what you should expect, and how you have conflict, and, you know, all of those kind of things. And I was thinking about just your success in what you're doing on campus, thinking about your high at risk population. So, you know, this is the population that we've identified on your campus where it's like, these are your most vulnerable students. You really want to put a lot of resources and make sure they have those connections that you're solving. And so I think you guys talked about this in your Spark meeting. Your high at risk population was at a retention rate of 30.3%. And we were like, here's the population that you need to work. And you worked really hard and you increased their retention to almost 50%. So an increase of almost 20%. That's amazing. And that's just an iterative process. That's just, we're just going to get better and better and better. Yes, we think about retention and we want financial health for our institution and all of that. But I just think about the names. Like, I just think about the names of those students who, because you were super intentional about getting good at supporting them, they just are going to have a different story. It's really amazing. You've done such a remarkable job.
Like watching them cross the green at graduation, and you sit there and you go, this is their future. Like it's almost like at the end of a movie when they're like, well, here's what happened to all these characters. Yeah. When you see them, like, oh, I can almost in my head see like this, there's a better life ahead for this student. Sure. Who I may have met on probation there for my first semester, and now here they are walking across the green.
Yeah, and I would say I think one of the biggest blessings of the work that we get to do is that you get to be part of someone's story that they then say 20 years later, oh, yep, I remember, you know, Dr. Little, he's the one who decided I was going to graduate and walked with me. And that is priceless, that their kids hear your name in conjunction with, this is the reason why I was successful. I think it's really amazing. Okay, so I would just like to say we're at time. So I'm going to thank everybody for listening. If you want to hear about how Dr. Little became a star of a reality show, you can stick around with us because I'm going to get him to tell us that story. But I think you can hear just from this conversation that we've had how much those formative experiences of challenge and struggle help you be a better student success professional. And just it's just so good to be reminded of the power of the jobs that we get to do, and the privilege it is to be able to make an impact on people's lives for generations to come. So I think it's really awesome. All right. So you were in Japan. You were a stay-at-home dad, right?
Yep.
Okay. First of all, how did you get to Japan?
I had been going through my career and, you know, working my way through and you know, I had a vision in mind of what I wanted to do by the time I hit 40, and I got to it. And like a lot of things that can happen in when you get the thing you want, you're like, oh, turns out this is not actually what I wanted. I didn't want that. I take it back. That was you know, because, and that's one, and that's one of the sad things about sometimes about higher ed too, is that the higher up you go, the further away you get from the thing that you love the most.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of what was happening. And so I told my wife, I said, look, I've been dragging you around to all these different places. You find something and I will go, and we will go and we'll do it. And she's like, well, there's a job opening in Tokyo to be a faculty member at a university there. Wow. And that's actually, she had taught there before we got married. I was like, okay, sounds good. Let's try it. And we got it. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess we're doing this for real now. And so we moved to Japan. She worked at Tokyo International University. And she had a great time. And so I was like, okay, well, let me finish my dissertation, but I'll take care of everything at home. And so I'll do everything that needs to be done. I'll get the kids ready. I'll get them to school. We'll take care of all that. I'll do all the things that need to be done, so she doesn't have to worry about anything except for, you know, going to work and then coming back in. And so didn't think much of it. It was like we would have done this in the States too. Everything was fine. And I went to the airport to pick up my in-laws who were coming to visit us. And these people came up and said, "Hi, we're with a Japanese TV show. What are you doing in Japan?" And well, or why did you come to Japan? I said, "Oh, I live here. Yeah, my works for a university here." And they go, "Well, what do you do?" Which is a very Japanese question to ask. Like they're like knowing what your occupation is a
Very important.
very important. And I said, "Oh, I'm a stay-at-home dad. I just stay at home." And and they're like, "Wait, what do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm a stay-at-home dad. I wash dishes, I wash clothes. I get the kids ready for school." And they're like, "Oh, we have that too. We call that a housewife." And I said, "Okay, yeah, I mean, sure." I said, "Yeah," and they're like, "We have to see what your day looks like."
Okay.
And I thought, okay, sure. I was like, this is some random person with a YouTube channel, and like I'm never going to hear from this person again. And they emailed me and said, "Okay, we'd love to see you come visit." I was like, "Okay." And they said, "Well, this is the show we're with." And so they told us the name, which I think is Yu wa Nani Hashi Nippone. I think is which is what are you doing in Japan? That's what it is.
Oh, okay.
And I look it up, and it's like a real show. It's like a nationally broadcast show. And I was like, "Oh, okay." I have definitely been off more than I can chew. I said, "Sure, yeah, come watch, I guess." And so they came to our house for 2 days, 12 hours each day, and filmed me washing dishes, washing clothes, folding clothes, hanging them up, vacuuming, taking my daughter to her bus stop for her to go to her daycare.
It was riveting, I'm sure.
Exactly. And at one point they said, "We thought your schedule would be more hectic." And I thought, well, that is the most polite way I've ever been told my life is boring. But it came for 2 days, and I took my daughters to a park, and because I wanted to, my oldest daughter really wanted more friends, but she wasn't in Japanese school; she was still in online American school at that point. And I said, it's really tough because one, as a male, that's very unusual for me to be the one taking the kids out to the park, and then being very obviously American, like we clearly were not Japanese in any way, shape, or form. And so they wanted to keep watching us go to parks until I met a fellow shifu friend, which is the housewife basically. So and so eventually I did meet another mom at the park, and so I think my episode something like American man does housework ? Former teacher's park debut, I think is what it said on the screen.
How funny.
And I was like, okay, sure. And this is never going to air because this is so boring. There's no way this is ever going to air. And then in February they said, oh, by the way, it's gonna run. And so we got on there and we watched it, and it was incredible and it was very cool. I was like, well, that's really neat. I don't think anyone watched this. Because why would you? And then we went on Twitter, and there were like tons and tons of people talking about us on Twitter that had watched the show.
Oh my gosh, how surreal.
And we had to translate all of them because they were in Japanese. And then one of my wife's friends that lived in Taiwan said, were you just on a TV show in Japan? And apparently it broadcast in Korea and Taiwan and all over the nation.
Gosh.
And we're like, how weird. And so one day we were walking to 7-Eleven, and there were these kids walking a block away from us. And we didn't think much of it because like, yeah, there's kids everywhere. We get into the 7-Eleven and we're getting some stuff. And I go, oh, I forgot something in the last aisle. And I cut back quickly. And there those kids are with their phones up. Like they had been filming.
Paparazziing you?
Yes, around.
You were famous.
People stopped us in the park. People at the grocery store, they would be sitting there, and then they would be like, I saw you on TV, and then go back to work.
How strange is that?
Oh, it was so weird. We went to the other side of the country for a vacation, and this little girl came running up to my daughter and gave her a big hug and said, Penny-chan, Penny-chan. And I said, sweetie, who's that? She's like, I don't know. I guess I go to school with her. I said, no, sweetie, we like took a flight to be here.
Right.
And we were like, oh, she saw her on the TV.
Wow.
And then a year later, they wanted to do a Where Are We Now little special on us, so we were on a second time, and
Oh, interesting.
it was really bizarre.
You know what's so nice about that though is that when your children are older, you are going to have this like little time capsule of what it was like when they were younger and what your days look like. And I mean, that's pretty precious to have, you know. It's
Well,
gonna
and
be-
I'll say the weirdest after so I talked to about the I got an email last week. They wanted to talk to us again like on so I don't know if our episode did really well or something, or
yeah,
if because I unfortunately I don't speak Japanese, so I don't know. I
you're
don't know if
very famous in Japan.
yeah there could be I could have some sort of nickname, and there's like there's an anime based on me or something, but
We're gonna have to do some research on
I'll do
this.
some
We're
research
gonna,
on
we're
that.
gonna have to put some punctuation on this story and see, like, yeah, you're just super well known in Japan. It's
Because
great.
I go there, there's people with my face on their shirts or something. And
That's a little bit unnerving, right? Isn't it kind of scary when someone, I mean, it's kind of like where we started with being a DJ when somebody's like, I know these things about you. And you're like, I've never met you before in my life.
right, how do you know
I'm glad
this?
I'm glad you feel close to me, but you're a stranger. I don't know who you are.
I was just a person in a room talking to myself. I didn't.
Right. Well, hey, thank you so much for joining me today. It has been such a delight, and I know we could probably do another 3 episodes and unpack some more of your experiences. But I know that our listeners have so enjoyed it, and I appreciate you sharing just your gift of love for students with us. Thank you for that.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I loved it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. We'll talk to you later. Bye.